Bonnie Parker is stretched out in the back seat of a stolen Ford 5.8, skin slick with sweat, hands knotted in her lap, teeth clenched and fighting a pain that's been gnawing at her for weeks. Her right thigh's wrapped in what barely passes for a bandage, a ragged strip of torn dress, yellowed and stiff. Underneath, the wound is a mess, raw, weeping, red like butcher's meat, so deep that some eyewitnesses swore you could see bone. Every bump in the road means another spike of agony. The air in that car is thick and sour. Gasoline, fried chicken, mildew, and cutting through it all. The sharp reek of infection, the kind of stink that tells you something inside is rotting in the Texas summer. That's not the Bonnie and Clyde you get in the movies. The screen version is all motion. Slick hair, perfect clothes, snapping off wisecracks while bullets fly legends, with a cigarette and a wry smile, always a step ahead. But the truth, it was uglier. Most of their time on the run, Bonnie and Clyde weren't racing anywhere. They were hobbling, crawling, bleeding their way across the South, sometimes barely able to walk, let alone dance through a hail of gunfire. This isn't just about a couple of wounds. It's about the day-to-day cost, physical, immediate, unrelenting of being America's most wanted, when you can't even stand up by yourself. The movies left out every limp, every grimace, every sticky, sour hour spent in the back of a stinking car, because that doesn't fit the legend. Let's rewind to what really happened. June 1933, just outside Wellington, Texas. Police chase, the Barrow Gang's Ford flips into a ravine. The car battery bursts. Acid sprays across Bonnie's leg. She's pulled out half-conscious, her dress already eaten away, skin bubbling and blackening by the minute. A hospital is out of the question. Too many cops, wanted posters on every wall. So, the gang does what they have to. They raid a farmhouse, steal towels, wrap her wound, grab whatever they can find, baking soda, even. They try to pack it on, hoping to pull out the acid or dull the pain. No morphine, barely any soap. For the next week, Bonnie drifts in and out, feverish, shivering, and halfway to delirious. This is the bit Hollywood scrubs out. She couldn't walk, not for days. To be honest, not really for months. Her legs stiffened up into a half-bent angle. Some days her foot dragged uselessly behind her, the pain so sharp she nearly fainted from even trying to stand. Clyde or W.D. Jones had to carry her sometimes for something as basic as a bathroom break behind a tree, sometimes out of the car and across brush with bullets snapping around them. There were weeks where Bonnie couldn't even sit upright, just lay flat in the back seat or across someone's lap, hair matted with sweat, flies circling the bandage. And that was only the start. The real problem wasn't the wound itself, it was everything the wound changed. The Barrow Gang lived out of that Ford. 5 adults crammed shoulder to shoulder, bags of ammo under their feet, bread crusts on the seats. And now a badly wounded woman whose injury turned every routine into a logistical nightmare. Eating, sleeping, even escaping, it all got slower, messier. Every time a roadblock popped up or someone got suspicious, the gang's speed dropped to the pace of their slowest, most injured member. Bonnie couldn't sprint, couldn't even hobble fast. In a world of ambushes and sudden getaways, that's about as close to a death sentence as you get. So what do you do when one of your crew can't walk? You can't risk a doctor, and every move might tear the wound open again? That's where the real story starts, and where the Hollywood legend starts falling apart. It's bad enough to be wounded. It's something else entirely when your whole life, your survival starts revolving around those wounds. After the Wellington crash, Bonnie and Clyde's life wasn't a stylish chase. It was more like a rolling triage unit clattering down the back roads, everybody negotiating pain, infection, and gravity just to get through the day. Nobody was leaping out of getaway cars. Every escape was a calculation. Who could move, how fast, and who had to be carried. Think about the logistics. 5 adults in a Ford V8. Bonnie, Clyde, W, D, Jones, Buck, and Blanche. Barrow plus guns, ammo, sacks of bread, bags, and one person who couldn't bend her leg without screaming. Dinner? If you could call it that, it was eaten elbow to elbow, passing around greasy fried chicken or cold beans. Bonnie shifting, each movement threatening to split her scab open again. The car's heat was stifling, windows cracked just enough so the smell didn't bring trouble. Flies lived on that bandage, crawling the raw edges, never leaving her alone. If you've ever tried to swat a fly with one hand, eat canned beans with the other, and keep a gun within reach, you're starting to get the picture. Bathing? Forget it. Not with that wound. If they got lucky, they'd stop at a remote creek, but even that was a risk. Getting Bonnie out of the car was a slow struggle, Clyde or WD, half carrying her to the water's edge, watching for curious neighbors or the law. The bandage only came off as much as they dared, and the creek water was just as likely to add a new infection as relieve the pain. Blanche, who played nurse by default, later admitted those dressings were never clean. Sometimes Bonnie just ended up with a new layer of dirt pressed in after a so-called bath. The best you could hope for was that infection didn't win today. Sleep? That was another kind of misery. Bonnie's choices were the floorboard's legs stuck straight or stretched across 2 laps in the back seat. No privacy, no comfort. The upholstery soaked up sweat, blood, infection. Every moan or cough in the night could wake the whole gang. The Ford's good springs just meant you bounced every time someone changed seats, jostling her wound all over again. Forget the moonlit outlaw romance intimacy meant someone's knee in your ribs and the constant whiff of rot. The wounds dictated everything, how fast they could move, what roads they could take, even which stores they dared to rob. On a good day, Bonnie might clamber out with heavy support, leaning hard on Clyde or WD. On a bad day, she had to be carried sometimes through mud or brush, sometimes while gunfire started up. Running wasn't even an option. Eyewitnesses described her as limping, being held up, or dragging her foot, never the dashing, dancing vision from the movies. During one chase, Clyde had to half-drag Bonnie from the car, her hands clenched on his shoulder, her foot trailing in the dirt, as the rest of the gang scattered for cover. Heroics? Not even close. It was just logistics, and it was ugly. The glamour came later, once nobody had to show what it looked like to limp your way through a getaway. And let's talk about Clyde. Movies like to put him in sharp suits, hat at an angle, walking with easy swagger. In reality, Clyde's right foot was mangled. He'd lost 2 toes in prison, and after Wellington, his limp was worse. He couldn't keep a shoe on that foot. Sometimes he wore a sock, sometimes a stolen boot, sometimes nothing at all. He'd drive barefoot when he couldn't stand the pain. Try pressing a clutch with a clubfoot, dirt road bucking under you, cops maybe on your tail. The 1967 movie? Warren Beatty gets to leap and scoop Faye Dunaway into his arms. Real Clyde could barely sweep his own foot across the running board without wincing. Let's pause for a host moment. If you ever wondered why their escapes were so daring, here's the answer. They didn't have a choice. You can't just fade into the trees when one of you is leaking blood and the other's limping around in a blistered sock. Their options shrank every day. No pharmacies, no hospitals, no cries for help that wouldn't get them arrested. Every new infection, every fever, every fresh tear in the wound meant recalculating. Where do we sleep tonight? What do we need to steal? What back road can we risk? How do we carry Bonnie if it all goes sideways? Here's an ugly irony Hollywood skips. Half the Barrow Gang's romantic outlaw life came down to someone standing lookout, while another tried to peel a puss-soaked bandage off Bonnie's leg without puking. Sometimes the bandage fused right to the wound. Tearing it free just opened the flesh again, restarting the blood and letting in the flies. Meanwhile, anyone out in the world could spot a limping woman or a man shuffling in a filling station parking lot. Sometimes sticking together was dangerous. Sometimes splitting up was worse. And still, the gang had to function, drive, eat, keep watch, plan robberies, sleep while the car reeked of infection and fear. Food? Think Depression-era scavenger hunt. Cold beans, sliced bologna, day-old biscuits, maybe canned peaches if you got lucky. It wasn't champagne and roast chicken. You passed the can, wiped the spoon on your sleeve, tried not to get blood on the bread. Let's be real. Nothing about this was glamorous, and the gang knew it, maybe everyone did. Except for the filmmakers who'd one day turn their misery into a doomed love story. The truth of Bonnie and Clyde's life on the run wasn't a dance of passion, it was a day-in, day-out negotiation with pain. Every limp, every slow escape, every blood-streaked meal in the back seat brought them closer to the only ending available for people too wounded to run. That's the real story Hollywood missed. They didn't just skip the limp, they erased the suffering that shaped everything that followed. So next time you see Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway bounding across the screen, remember the real couple, half-dragged, half-carried, stinking of blood and beans. Chased, not by romance, but by the knowledge that even one missed step could be the end. The myth has no room for a woman who had to be carried to a creek or a man wincing every time he shifted his foot on the gas. The truth was heavier, and it always rode along in the back seat. The wounds never healed, but the world kept moving. For Bonnie and Clyde, every burst of speed was a negotiation with pain, a dance with failure that Hollywood just didn't want to choreograph. When their Ford finally shuddered to a halt on that Louisiana dirt road, the couple's limping, crawling ordeal was ended in a single deafening minute. The ambush wasn't just deadly, it was excessive. More than 50 rounds, each one tearing up bodies already ruined by weeks on the run. The car was shredded, the bodies inside barely recognizable. No elegant last embrace, no tragic final words, just a heap of mangled limbs, blood-soaked clothes, the sharp stench of gunpowder mixing with sweat and infection. The Ford's battered upholstery, already ruined by weeks of wounds and bad food, absorbed one last indignity. And here's the final unfilmable truth. The wounds that crippled Bonnie and Clyde in life made them nearly impossible to handle in death. Morticians struggled to keep embalming fluid inside bodies riddled with holes, old and new. Bonnie's leg leaked its own mix of fluids. After the heat and trauma, their skin began to slip and slough off under the lamps. Details the 1,967 film shockingly left out. So much for a Hollywood ending. The funeral homes were mobbed, crowds trying to cut off locks of hair, some even dipping handkerchiefs in the pooled blood at the ambush site as souvenirs. Morticians stitched, stuffed, patched, but there was no restoring what had been lost. Any romantic last look at Bonnie and Clyde was filtered through the haze of leaking chemicals, unhealed wounds, and the sick, sweet odor of death fighting the summer air. For a few days, the bodies that had limped and bled across the South became exhibits, one last piece of the show, and this time there was no denying the pain was real. But the myth makers won out. The press photos, cropped so you couldn't see the worst. The movie gave us stars with perfect skin, running in tragic slow motion. The physical horror, the bandages, the limp, the sock, the stink of death never made the cut. Audiences got a legend scrubbed clean. Only the morticians and a handful of unlucky witnesses got the version you don't forget. So what's really left behind by Hollywood's biggest lie? Not just the memory of Bonnie and Clyde as beautiful rebels, but the way we forget what outlaw life actually cost. Next time you see them sprint on screen, remember, in real life, they could barely stand. The bandages told a story louder than any Tommy gun, constant pain, exhaustion, and a logistics problem so ugly that even their last minutes were defined by wounds that no camera dared show. If you learned something about the real physical cost behind the legend, subscribe for more stories that leave the Hollywood filter behind. Because sometimes what sticks with you from the outlaw story isn't the shootout, it's what the wounds left behind long after the credits should have rolled.